I learned a lot about Winter, Wisconsin when I was here. I learned other things after I left here. While I was here, first year of teaching, I decided I was going to try to get every student to do his or her absolute best. In order to do that, I had to find out where they stood. We spent hours going over every student record that was, until I knew exactly what everybody's past records and achievements and everything was. And I kept doing that for 31 years of teaching. Found out a surprising thing, that if I list, after 31 years of teaching here and at DC in Schofield, if I list the top 3 smartest students that we had, they all came from Winter, Wisconsin. It's quite surprising, but after a lot of years, it doesn't surprise me anymore. I also remember that some of the students in these classes that I was teaching wrote some of the best works I ever read in 31 years. I can still quote lines of poetry written by the students at Winter, which I think is pretty amazing. Anyway, while I was here, I liked to canoe a lot. And I noticed that one of the girls wrote in my yearbook that she planned to fill my canoe with rocks if she got a chance. So that's why I didn't bring my canoe along tonight, because I was afraid it would get filled with rocks. The problem is, I think she actually did, because it seems to be a little bit heavier than it was 50 years ago when I was here. But anyway, while I was here, I was researching a lot of things that were going on around the world, and I noticed that the British were building kayaks, and nobody else was. So I decided to build a kayak. And I started working on that. One of the students said he wanted to build one too. So together we started working on these, finished them up at Shell Anderson's garage with a smoky gas heater. And finally one day we had them done. We took them out for a test ride in one of the flowages in the early spring when the water had just barely melted. And we got in our kayaks and started paddling along. And we're out on this little island and looked back and all I could see was the bottom of the boy's kayak. I thought, we have a problem. So I went racing back as fast as I could. I just arrived and his head bobbed up above the water, and I helped him get back up, and I pulled him to shore. And you know, the hard part that interested me most was, even though he was frozen from the cold water, he never complained. Never said it was cold. So I figured the kids up there were pretty tough. The interesting part to me was, very shortly after I moved down to Schofield, there was an article about kayaks, which was the first one that ever appeared in this country. It started the current kayak craze. We just had a paddle on Lake Wausau, about 2 miles to the Trails End Bar. We had over 1,000 kayakers registered. And that all started in winter. So anyway, I found another thing that was pretty interesting. A couple of the boys came in after class one day, and they were talking about hunting with me. And I mentioned I love to call predators. And they said, that can't be done. I said, well, I do it all the time. Yeah. They said, prove it. So on a given day, we grabbed our guns and ammunition, jumped into my Jeep, and off we went. Now today, I suppose I'd have to check to see that they had hunter certification. All kinds of things about them, give written permission from 5 or 6 lawyers. At that time, we just did it. I assumed that they were competent because they said they loved them. So we went out, started calling at one place, and 2 giant hawks came in and sat in a tree and watched us. Can't call hawks unless you're inside a hot log. I said, way too good. Went to a second place, which was an old abandoned gravel pit, I guess. And I posted the boys on the far rim of the gravel pit. I started calling from the opening. Within 20 seconds, the coyote jumped right over the rim and almost landed on the one student, and instantly he shot. Which I thought was pretty phenomenal. Most people, when they have a coyote almost land on their lap, they kind of shake it out. But he didn't. So I guess they were as competent as I expected them to be. On another occasion, one of the girls came in and wanted some help with an English paper she was working on, and when I finished that up, she was packing up her stuff to go. I happened to ask her how she liked all the rain we had, because it had rained really, really hard and it hadn't rained for a long time before that. And she gave me a very strange answer. She said, that was great. It made for really wonderful picking. And I was immediately taken aback. I couldn't think what she could possibly be thinking. All the berry crops were in for the year. I didn't know what it was. I said, finally, what were you thinking? She said, night crawlers. Suddenly I had to shift my whole thinking, and that was a bit of a shock to me. I had to think of this feminine girl crawling around in the mud, thinking, night crawlers. So then I asked her why she did it. She said, I did it for my college fund. I didn't realize until then, because I never seriously thought about it, that Winter, Wisconsin did not have many employment opportunities for teenagers. It didn't have strings of fast food restaurants. They didn't have all the opportunities to work at retail stores. So she's doing the best she could, and I hope she got enough angleworms to get a good job. But speaking of worms, I have to tell you this little story. While I was down in D.C. Everest, we had a very, very naughty boy. Now, I'm not talking about the malicious kinds like our big Polish boy that grabbed a scalpel one day and tried to kill people in the commons, or our janitors came down mopping the floor with their mops and caught him on the sides of the head, put him on the floor. Police would come and carry him. But there was nothing malicious like that. I'm not talking about girls like Maria, who one day came into my home looking like a thundercloud, and she disappeared. Well, I found out a little bit later she stole the keys to her boyfriend's car and driven it to the library wall where she ended up parked next to the circulation desk. Well, what do you think happened to her when she goes into a library? She got booked. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just a naughty boy who loved to take people's purses together so they couldn't open them, who loved to hang signs off people, kick me and pinch me and things like that. It was just always an irritation. I stopped several times naughty boys bigger than him for beating him up. Afterwards, I wondered why I did. But one day, what happened was, the story is almost illogical. It really happened. I dismissed my 4th hour class, and after that, I had a 30-minute lunch hour. I took a prep plan to finish going over some papers that could get back to the next class. And normally, this was not a normal day, because after class, one girl stayed behind, and she asked me a question. She said, would you do me a favor? I said, well, I do lots of people favors. What can I do for you? This is the request she made. She said, my parents have a big worm farm, and they're trying to promote worms as human food. And my mother had made this batch of earthworm cookies, and I wondered if we could go to sample those and give us some feedback. Well, I ate anything. I said, sure, I'll be glad to try it, and I'll give you some feedback tomorrow. So she set a napkin on my desk, and she put 3 cookies on it. And I sat there, and I was starting to write papers, but I realized I was very hungry. I reached over, picked up one of the cookies, and I looked at the bottom of it, kind of because it's cookies. Then I went back to grading papers. And for some reason or other, I had not gotten up to shut my door that day. And all of a sudden, I noticed a motion. The door opened slightly, and in came this naughty boy. I mean, he never came that early, but he did that day, when my door was not shut. And he instantly spotted the cookies on my desk, ran over, grabbed the cookie, and took a big bite out of it, and he set the other half down the desk. He said, got you that time, didn't I? He said, yes, Rob, this time you really got me. He says, how come you ain't mad? I said, how often do you see me get mad? He said, He was kind of upset because I wasn't mad at him. I said, would you do me the thing? Would you tell me what your reaction was? Was that cookie good? He says, it tasted great. I said, could I quote you on that? He said, quote away. He said, could I use your name with that? He said, sure, go ahead. And I said, cookie tasted great. I wrote that down on a piece of paper, and I said, I'll relay that to the committee. He said, what committee? He said, the committee in charge of this research project. I said, but as long as the first half tasted great, maybe we should try the second half. But before you do, would you take a close look at the bottom? He looked at it and he says, what are all the little circles? I said, those are earthworms. I said, those are earthworm cookies that the person has baked as part of the clinical trial. Thank you for your participation. He said, what are they really? I said, those are earthworms. And I said exactly what I just said. And all of a sudden, he got this horrified look on his face and he said, I can get worms! He was running out to be sick in the bathroom. He came back a while later and he says, what are those really? And I said, those are earthworms. Those are the plants that you can see here. He says, am I going to die? I could have been really mean and told him and said, I don't think so because I ate one of these cookies just before you came in. And if we both died, there must be an oversized coffin that put us both in debt. And you can torment me through all eternity. He didn't like that idea either. So he went to his desk and put his head down, and to my knowledge, he did not ever pull any more French. My wife was fond of saying, "It goes around, comes around, and it came around." You know. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the reunion. Thanks for inviting me.